Hello and welcome to the very first edition of our ETH Zurich and University of Zurich video podcast. My name is Erik Jentges and I work at the ETH Zurich in the Department of Management Technology and Economics. I head the Teaching Innovations Lab and I support our lecturers to become better and more efficient educators. With me today, we have Patrick Veenhoff and Inez von Weitershausen from the University of Zurich. I would like to give the word to Inez to say a little bit about yourself before we turn to our host and guest for today, Patrick. Inez, please.
Sure, thanks, Erik. Inez von Weitershausen. I'm Head of Learning and Outreach at the Center for Leadership in the Future of Work at the University of Zurich. We are basically coming out of the management department and are a group of individuals very interested in understanding how the future of work looks like with a sort of people-centered perspective.
Patrick, what do our viewers need to know about you?
My name is Patrick Veenhoff. I work as a human capital consultant, and I'm an advisor and sparring partner for large organizations. I help them to consolidate and transform for the digital economy so that they can achieve their goals.
Thank you. So, what are we doing here? This is a live video podcast, and Inez and we came together a few months ago actually, and realized we want to bring topics onto the stage, be a bit more public with learning and development, what happens in education within our institutions, what happens with learning and education in companies and the corporate world. And in order to build a platform where we can discuss these elements, we thought, why not invite interesting guests and have a conversation? So this is a very conversational approach. We have about 30 minutes. And maybe as a starter, I can tell you a little bit about how Patrick and I met, which is probably 3 or 4 years ago within a Kickstart acceleration program here in Zurich, which was really looking at bringing EdTech startups from around the world together and try to let them find opportunities in Switzerland and in Europe. And both Patrick was back then at the Enterprise Academy at Swisscom, if I recall correctly.
Yes, that's right.
And I was already at the Department for Management Technology and Economics, still fresh. And it was a very interesting collaboration. So coaching these startups, being in the jury, looking at a lot of EdTech pitches. So I think Patrick has a very broad overview of what happens in the corporate learning world. And now you're also consulting bigger companies. Now, with this being said, we need to have a starting question. And what could that be? What should we talk about, Inez, Patrick? What is your gut feeling right now?
Patrick, I have so many questions. I don't even know where to begin. But as this is a live sort of podcast, I also have to just take 1 second because my little son he's 15 months old. He decided it's time to play the piano. Just excuse me for 1 second. In the meantime, think about the answer to this one. What got you interested in learning?
So, Patrick, what got you interested in learning?
Actually, when I was at school myself, I was never that impressed with how education was being done. After I did my gymnasium, I tried to study at 4 different universities in the Netherlands. And after about 6 weeks each, I just dropped out because it was just not my way of learning. And throughout the years, I tried, different ways of learning. I did a master's degree at a certain point in my life, but I always thought that there was something missing. And that doesn't mean that I don't have an interest in learning, because I try to learn something new every day. Just that feedback loop seemed to be missing. And so throughout my life, I did different types of jobs. And then at one point, when I came at Swisscom, they asked me to set up a sales academy. And in a second step, then I became head of learning for 5,000 people. And the thing that really drives me is that I like to help people move forward in their lives, either personally or professionally. And I'm good at solving complex issues. And I think that these two drivers led me then to the area of learning.
Inez is back. The little one played the piano.
He did, and he's brilliant. If not, no, but that was so fascinating, and obviously, now I have even more questions, Patrick. Erik, may I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, really cool. Because what you just said about, well, first of all, I love the story of, having had a sort of somewhat not that easy time in school, if you want, in terms of getting inspiration for learning. And I can just sort of, I guess, allude you and everybody else who's watching to a good friend of mine, Tony Wagner, who's a brilliant, well, everything, a scholar, person, educator, from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and he just published his memoirs, Learning by Heart, and he basically tells his story, which is also one of, really not having had the easiest time in school, and then sort of succeeding, getting, as I said, his doctorate at the Harvard Graduate School, and now being one of the leading figures in the American higher education, or not higher education, sorry, education field in general. But I would love to come back to your what you said thereafter, then, Patrick, which was that you led a skills academy with 5,000 for 5,000 people. Now, Erik and I, we're passionate about teaching. We have our own classroom, professors or instructors, but never 5,000. So how do you manage to run any program for 5,000 people? By yourself?
No. No, you don't. One of the famous misconceptions that I have seen amongst my peers is that they believe that they can predict, what are the skills needed for the next for 5 years, and that I always challenge, because when I was talking with the line managers across the organization, and I asked them, well, what skill sets do you need in the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years? The only thing that they could answer me and sign their name under it were the skills for the next year. And the reason with that being is that the market has become so dynamic that even they don't know how the market is developing, and so they don't know, how far ahead can they start to plan, and that requires a very different approach in solving that skill issue.
So you need to actually upskill on a very short notice, or hire new people, or outsource to bring in those talents.
Yes, actually, there's a whole set of different mechanisms. Like one of the other things that is happening is that people are getting more and more busy. They get an overload of information, and then just like with any advertising company trying to scream for attention of the person receiving it, like, hey, look at me. This is the exact same challenge that education institutions or learning departments inside organizations have, because there's such a plethora of information available. How do I, as an individual, know what information is relevant for me? I don't have the time to go through 10 different things and find out. I want to quickly access that what I need. And because of the shift, people are looking for content that is helping them today in their job. They are not looking for skills that maybe in 5 years they can help them.
So it's really the short-term need that drives learning from the learner's perspective, so to say.
Yes, yeah, completely. And there, I think that there's still a big difference between that what the universities are offering, because they're, they are teaching your brain how to think and analyze problems, and how to deal with unknown situations, so that you can come up with a type of answer. Whereas in a corporate environment, You know the job that you're supposed to do, or that the company is requesting of you. Some people have a bit more experience than others, and they can use that. But often it's more about, okay, how do I now do this task, or how can I do my work more efficient so that I can generate more money, be more cost effective, have happier customers, and reduce the risk inside my organization.
Inez, I wonder what would happen if we had those key performance indicators for our students in their learning.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. And as Patrick was speaking, I was actually wondering, what is the relationship then? Should we just in a way keep it that way? Teach the foundations, if you want, at the university, or should we become more, just I don't want to say more like a corporation in that regard, but make people aware that ultimately, at least their learning approach to learning will have to change. Maybe that should be part of maybe just that mindset shift, apparently, that Patrick speaks about. Maybe that should somehow be part of our teaching as well. But I would love to hear Patrick's opinion on that. I mean, what do you think they're just nicely complementary, if you want, the university education and then the sort of more training-based or ad hoc skills needed training-based education, if you want, in companies, or should they somewhat speak to each other?
Yeah, I think that's quite a philosophical question. I'm not really sure if I have the capability of giving an answer to that, but my personal opinion about university or higher education in general is that they have a business model that has been working for for tens of years quite successfully, and the world outside is changing. I'm not sure how successful these business models are going to be in the future. So I think that's one consideration that education institutions in general need to make. How can they serve their customers, which are their students, in the best possible way? How can they add value in the best possible way? There is one side where I think that what they are doing now, building the way of how to think, is very critical, because you need to learn that in life at a certain point if you want to be able to deal with very complex matters. On the other hand, there's also a very big request from the corporate side, where the requirements are changing so fast that if educational institutions have a way to address these more ad hoc, or become more flexible in how they structure their curriculum, I think there could be a better match between the two.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting element if you look at the business model of universities, but at the same time, universities and the education that they provide is not always a business. So I wouldn't really agree to talk about our students as clients. Of course, in continuing in executive education courses, they do pay extra for their education, but it's on the bachelor's level and master's level. It's also an education on how to become a good citizen in society, how to explore and discover new areas of knowledge. And the universities also recruit from their student body into the doctoral programs, into postdoc researchers, to ultimately recruit into people who drive the research further as professors. So there is different ideas or core principles that are in competition within universities themselves. And of course, one of the aspects you mentioned is, there needs to be a good bridge towards the corporate world, towards the industry. Ultimately, we also educate our students to become part of the workforce. And I do agree that universities have been very stable for the sake of a neutral world, and not too responsive onto the very fast dynamics of the business world. So how do we really educate our students to be ready for the first job when they leave our institutions? So do they have to do they need the foundations? Do they need the subject matter? Or do they need to be able to learn quickly? I mean, the basic question is, do we still mold knowledge workers, or do we mold and form learning workers? People who
No,
learn quickly.
there is one example that of the team that I've led at Swisscom that pops into mind right now, because the approach that we took at Swisscom, we enabled the organization to teach and learn from themselves. So the team that I had, we did not create any training content anymore, and we did not train anybody. And I remember that there was one employee in my team. He was around 50 years old, been with Swisscom for quite some time. He was trained to be a trainer. And then, here comes this Dutch guy and says, "Oh, you know what? We're not going to train anybody anymore." So, he was having some existential crisis questions. Does the company still need me? What am I going to do right now? Yes, we still need him. We still need his skills, just in a different way. So, all of the experience that he has had as a trainer and knowing what is working, now rather than doing that himself, he became an enabler of the organization so that the organization could do all of the training, and he became their trainer on how to do that. And just it's a mindset shift as well. And in the end, he realized, well, actually, by sharing my knowledge, I start to become more valuable for the organization. And I think that going back to universities, I think that what they are doing in essence, it is just as valuable in the future as it is today. But perhaps the way in which they are doing it, if they modify that, then it can become even more valuable for a bigger group of people.
Okay, tell me more about the modification. Tell us more about the modification, please. I think that's a fascinating thought. What would that look like, in your opinion?
That universities start to modify their approach.
So that we not only teach students so that they learn, but that we get students to learn how to teach later when they're in the company as well, to co-facilitate learning processes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've always done for myself when I try to explain somebody is I imagine I'm explaining something to a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old for if it's a bit more complex. And because with a 16-year-old, they generally have developed their intelligence enough that they can understand more complex matters. But at the same time, they don't have this wealth of experience from which they can relate. And so I think if you have that type of mindset, and if you can get people to explain topics in this way to other people, then that is a very effective way for making sure that people understand the topic themselves. Because if you cannot explain the topic in a simple way, you didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And so, it's a very small step, but if you would ask a student to come up to the class and say, okay, well, you say you understand it. Now, please explain the rest of the group in 1 minute what this topic is about.
Yeah. Now, this is a great. It's a great nugget of wisdom that also I think Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize physicist, said, if you really want to learn something, we have to teach about it to be able to explain it properly. I think that's a very good thing, and I don't think we really do that often at universities. It's still rather we give knowledge to students, and sometimes we let them have a presentation, and a presentation should be educational and explain their thought process and their outcomes. But maybe we could be more systematic about this.
Yeah, and Erik, I would even add, I think it's not just a problem of sort of students or at the student level. Sorry, I keep moving a lot. At the student level. But I mean, in London, where I did my PhD, one of the most helpful pieces of advice I got from at the very beginning was when my supervisor told me, Inez, when you think about your topic, the PhD topic, and we all think that we're changing the world with our PhD and have to make this huge contribution, but really it's not that long, that big. He said, and it sounds really politically incorrect now, and I think in 30 years' time, people won't even understand that quote anymore. But he said, do the taxi driver test. Imagine you're in London, and there's lots of these black, or at the time there were lots of these black cabs in London. And you have to explain your PhD in, really just a few sentences, your PhD topic, and just a few sentences as you're basically taking the cab from Embankment to Holborn, which is really a very short distance. And ideally, you should not even take a cab in that distance, right? But I thought it was such a good way because you're only capable of doing that, I suppose, when you really comprehend what you're doing. And it probably took me until the very end of my PhD to be able to do that, to be honest. But I think my point here is, even the most experienced teachers, have sometimes problems doing that. And, I think, so while everything that Patrick says makes so much sense, it really isn't that easy, right? It's not easy for students at the bachelor's level. It's not easy at the master's level. And it clearly isn't easy as things become complex, I guess, is my point, right? So Patrick, that leads me then back to the earlier question. This approach, is it really one that only works in a corporate setting where, as you said earlier, the problems are fairly limited, not that complex? Mm-hmm. Or is it also something that we can adapt really at the university level?
Yeah, I think it can be applied anywhere. It's not so much the approach that is the challenge, because in a corporate environment, you've got people. At a university, you've got people. So you're just dealing with people, and if it works with one group of people, it works with any group of people. The challenge is often more the culture, the expectations, the history, the shift of power, because all of a sudden, me as a trainer, I am not in control anymore. I'm giving away my power, and even if people might not perceive that as giving away power, it's that strange feeling like, oh no, it's not possible. The quality cannot be good enough, so I think the bigger challenge is to how can you facilitate a mindset and a cultural change in order to start to try out these type of formats in a way that people feel comfortable, and that they're also willing to accept, well, maybe we just fail and maybe we cannot have that quality that we had before, but it's a nice add-on feature. We try it out, and as time passes by, we get some key learnings out of it, exactly the same way that university started 100 years ago. They also didn't know. They tried, and they perfected their craft over time. And now this is just a new format that I think definitely has a space somewhere inside educational institutions.
So how could this look like as one avenue for the future of learning and development in the corporate world, and maybe also in public institutions like universities? How could we bring such a shift of the mindset into these areas? And now I'm hinting on the thing that you're building, Patrick.
Yes, yeah. So I'm, there's a lot of talk about future of work. There's a lot of talk about collaboration. And you've got all of these tools out there that are enabling it. Still, we still got the same silos as we did 10 years ago. And so the thing I'm working on now is a solution which is a building block of a larger cultural change, and we're calling it Meet the Expert. And with Meet the Expert, you can find within 30 seconds the right expert inside your organization. Now, this approach is it works very well in a traditional mindset where you have those experts on that platform and say, "Hey, look at me, I'm important." For the expert, there's the benefit that they don't get a million requests. It's a very channeled approach, so they can start to save time and become more effective. And for a user, it's very interesting because they can find the right expert, they can immediately book, and they have the allowance to ask the question. And it's mostly that last part that is hindering a lot of people, because if I ask a question to an expert, maybe I look silly, or is this person willing to share their knowledge? And this is the barrier that we are taking away.
Yeah.
So having something like that, or an approach like that, it's one of the building blocks to start transforming that culture in breaking down silos and get people to interact more with each other without having to go through hierarchies.
Yeah. Just yesterday, I found a quote from Charlie Brown, which was basically kind of like, asking for help is not weakness. It's a great way to take care of yourself. And I think if you translate that to an employee who needs to learn something, keeping questions for yourself and not asking for help because it's inhibitive, or you could expose yourself, or you could you fear repercussions, that wouldn't really help. So it's a cultural shift that you need
Yes.
to
Yeah. And
encourage.
actually, I'm originally from the Netherlands, and the Dutch are known to be quite straightforward. And I never felt shy to ask for help. And a few weeks ago, a German friend of mine, he gave me a compliment, and he said, I'm so amazed how you dare to ask for help. And in a way that made me really sad, because for me it's something normal, but for somebody else to tell me that this is a compliment, that says a lot about the culture in which we are living in. So it's in the end, nobody has all of the knowledge in the world. We need each other, and I think that is one of the biggest challenges. Perhaps it's more of Germanic culture problem, because asking for help is often linked with "I am incapable." And so what I have experienced so far is that in the Germanic culture, it's very important that you give the right answer straight away, that it's in detail, and that it's correct from the beginning. Whereas if you look at the Anglo-Saxon culture, they have a very different approach where, okay, yeah, let's try it out. And if we fail, then it's important you figure out why you failed and you try to correct it. And it's that last part that is what is making you being seen as a professional, rather than in the Germanic culture where, doing the things right the first time. So
there is a large cultural component. I remember trying to find my way through Cairo, Egypt, and I was asking people, and there the culture was, it would be so impolite not to answer, not to try to be helpful. So even the people had no clue at all, they were pointing me into all kinds of directions. I basically had to pull out my social science toolkit and basically do a survey and go with the crowd wisdom. It's probably 5 people said that direction. Let me go into that direction and keep asking.
And I think that Patrick, you have such an interesting point here about the sort of prototyping mentality in Anglo-Saxon countries, right? And but again, sort of that connects them to the bigger question. How do we create that also sort of mind shift then that sort of Erik just alluded to, not just within a society, but even within a corporation? Because let's take with a smaller unit for now. If we are used to this sort of expert-driven Q&A attitude, if you want. So, and with your sort of undertaking, you're trying to sort of suggest a completely different approach. How do you shift organizational culture?
So this is the question that everybody wants to have an answer to, because so many organizations are failing to achieve that. It's often creating creating trust inside organizations, creating transparency. Everybody's talking about a learning culture, but what is a learning culture in reality? It means that it's okay if I mess up, and that my manager is not going to point the finger at me and say, oh, you're just doing bad, and now I'm going to get you a bad performance appraisal, and you're not going to get the salary raise that you are so much hoping for. With this solution that I'm building now with this group of people, is we are forming one building block in order to initiate that collaboration, in order to start building trust amongst people. And that is, when you start off with this platform, you are fitting very well in the traditional mindset where you've got a few experts which are getting recognized for their expertise on that platform. My personal belief is that every person has an expertise. Now, if that expertise is relevant for the organization, this is a different question, but everybody's got an expertise in something. And so over time, you're, as the platform is organically growing, more and more people are starting to come on that platform. And all of a sudden, it's not anymore that you have this status image from I'm an expert because I'm on the platform. No. So you start to move from knowledge is power to, by me sharing my knowledge, I start to become more valuable towards the organization. And once people start to understand that mindset shift, this is what is opening people to collaborate better. And so for me, that is one of the essential building blocks that an organization needs in order to drive that cultural transformation.
And it's also a way to add value to the whole network, right? Because it's every single individual potentially has added benefits for work-related expertise, but maybe also for expertise that is not directly work-related, maybe comes in the future, or may just add to a different personality.
Yes, exactly. The benefits that you get out of a solution like that are incredible, because you start to see all of those intangible interactions between people is starting to be transferred into actionable data. So you can start to figure out, well, who is the real expert inside my organization? When I do a change management project, who do I approach for these type of topics? Who is already spreading certain message to larger parts of the organization? You can start to do organizational network analysis, or figure out what are the problems that we might have, what are the skill gaps that we're having, and.
Very interesting elements.
Sorry, just to follow up, and I'd be very interested in the practicalities of this. So how do I say, if I'm the boss, right? Obviously, I'm very interested in just everything running smoothly, but I also want to make sure that things get done, right? And how do I make sure that people don't just spend all their time, if you want, answering each other's questions, or is that sort of is the implication that thereby things get done? Because ultimately, I guess my point is, ultimately, if you spend so much time on, in a way, it's like an internal social media, right? Internal social media, trying to help others out, that's great. You become, as you said, like a network knot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So
there he's been hired to do, right? So how do you balance that?
So these type of interactions, they are already happening today, but in a much less efficient way. So I heard a very good example from a large organization here in Switzerland, where somebody had a question about Excel, and so that question went to their manager, to another manager, and then it came to the director. And then the director had to find somebody who was an expert in Excel and could actually solve that problem. So here you're already talking about maybe 4 or 5 hours that just got lost in productivity, just finding that right person.
And if you calculate the hourly rate of their salaries, then the question has a price tag that's actually quite high.
Yes. And so imagine that you can just scrap all of that, and within 30 seconds, you have an appointment with the right expert inside the organization. And that meeting is going to last somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes, and that's it. And so there's a huge time saving there already. That is a massive productivity boost. At the same time, experts can also say, just on these days and during these hours, people can book appointments with me. And so that helps them to triage also the amount of requests that they are getting. So you want my help? Fine. Just use Meet the Expert, and you can book a time with me. So,
speaking about time, I do see that we're reaching and went beyond the half-hour mark, and we have other meetings coming up. But this was a very interesting conversation. Thank you, Patrick, so much for coming in and sharing your experiences from the corporate world and the thing that you're building. Best of luck with this. It sounds very interesting. Inez, what are your concluding words?
No, God, I have to think about this so much now. I loved it. Patrick, I think you really have sort of a tool in your hand that could potentially revolutionize, companies, universities. Erik, can we sign up for your expert database? And I just think, it'll be so interesting to see where this all goes. And I still do think that, Erik, at a later stage, you and I have to sit down and think about, what we can do to make use, in fact, of all the knowledge that we have in our organization, right? Our students are, I always say that, are just pools of knowledge, not necessarily the knowledge that we're teaching them, but they know so many things that are relevant. So how can we tap into that knowledge? I think a lot to learn. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much, Inez, and also thank you very much, Erik. It's been really a pleasure to have this discussion with you. So thank you very much for having me.
All right, then let's wave to our viewers. If you have questions from afar when you watch this video, reach out to us. You find our email addresses in the description below, and I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned. There will be more issues coming like these. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Bye.